what I want to talk about is negotiation, and this is kind of personally for me. So I used to work for a business, and it's much easier negotiating when you're actually negotiating for someone's on for a business, because ultimately it doesn't really affect. You may get a bonus, which is great, but you still get the salary coming in. Whereas now I'm on my own, I'm having to negotiate my own deals, and what I'm struggling with is how to separate myself from the actual business. Whereas when you're actually working for someone else, it's really easy. It's like, it's much easier to negotiate. What I'd love to know, and this will help loads of listeners, and you're obviously clearly with the example you gave of the coffee, with the coffee and the sugar and that dickhead, is to go into some negotiation principles. But I think to open it up, like what's been like the most intense negotiation you've had to go through in your career?
Yeah, so without a doubt, like, oh my God, and I've been through some pretty hectic negotiations. Without a doubt, it was my negotiating with the Clapham House Group when I bought the Bombay Bicycle Club. So I used to work for David and Paul, who had the Clapham House Group when I was at Pizza Express.
So like Clapham House Group,
Clapham House Group were the people that I bought the Bombay Bicycle Club with. So they were like the founders. It was negotiating how we split the equity and the deal and the entire financial structure of it. And they used to be my bosses. So that made it very, very difficult. And I actually had to walk away from the deal. And I meant it when I walked away. They took me to a point where I was like, this is never going to work. I am going to go and buy a different group of Indian restaurants, and I'm still going to have the largest chain of Indian restaurants in the UK. I'm just not going to do it with you. And I remember where I was stood when I said that. I can still feel my heart rate goes up. My heart, I think my pulse must have been about 160 at this point. It was, I couldn't believe it. It's like Sarah the Small. What the hell was I saying? I was really young at the time. I was still in my 20s. But I remember meaning it, absolutely meaning it. But what I learned, and I'd seen them negotiate a lot as well, because I had worked with them for years and I knew exactly how they negotiated. I knew all their tactics. So, but that was without a doubt, I'd spent nearly a year trying to buy that business. And I walked away from it. I got it back, obviously, but because that's what history tells you. You just need to Google it. So I got it back. But I walked away, and that was definitely the hardest negotiation I've ever done. But God, it taught me a lot.
So why did you walk away, and then what did it teach you? What was the?
So I walked away because we were nowhere near what I needed the deal to be in order for it to work for me. It was never going to work.
Right.
And in the end, after a night of reflection, really, I just said to myself, well, hang on. I'm so focused on this business because I spent a year trying to buy it, and I know this business inside and out, and I know what I'll go and do with it. Why don't I just go and buy another one? And make that the largest chain of Indian restaurants. I know the team. I know where else I can get the money from. I don't need them. I'm going to walk away. And there was real strength in that inside me, even though I felt sick saying it. But it worked. And it was not a negotiating tactic. It was genuine. I was walking away. I was done. But it worked, and we did end up getting a really good deal and everything. I did end up getting exactly what I wanted, and it all worked out great. And history tells you that it was a good business and blah, blah, blah. So it was all worked out really well in the end. But at that time, that was the hardest thing I've done, is in that moment was part of that negotiating was to walk away from it. That was really difficult. You did ask me a second question. What did I say?
Sorry. The second question, is like, how did the Sarah change after that phone call, basically? Like, how
Yeah.
did you change?
So I think it was a real moment, actually, of separating, to your point, of separating myself from a negotiation. I found it so personal. I felt like it was like a personal attack, that they were undervaluing me. I was in my late 20s. I didn't know any better. And I'd seen how they dealt with lots of other people. And I was like, God, how can they treat me the same? And I felt it. I took it personally. But that moment of me walking away, and then, of course, we came back and it all worked out great. I have never taken it. It's never been personal since. Since that moment, I have absolutely had the ability to just be strong and separate myself from the negotiation. The other thing that I learned from that negotiation as well, and I've carried that with me ever since, is always to manage expectations. And I see it, oh my God, I must see it in 90+% of the negotiations that I go into, where expectations are not managed. So if you, let's say, for example, you're trying to sell a business and you have a magic number, right? Doesn't matter how realistic or unrealistic that magic number is. Like, basically, you won't sell for less. You've got to manage expectations. And people don't, because people think, oh, well, what if I might get more, or, I don't want to leave money on the table. Well, firstly, when you're trying to sell a business, you've got to leave money on the table. That's essential, otherwise nobody's going to buy it. So get that out of your head in the first place. And secondly, it is really... I think just trying to think what I'm trying to remember exactly what I was just about to say. I've completely lost my thought. What was I just in the middle of saying there? I can't remember what
You're talking. It's about managing expectations.
Yeah, so that's it. Yes,
and you see it like magical number. Most brands,
yes,
not brands,
say,
people come up with.
manage the expectations of people around you. It's really, really important. So people don't do it because they think that they're going to leave money on the table. That's what I was going to say. So don't be greedy in a negotiation. Just be honest with yourself. I will do it for this. That's it. Like, this is what I will do it for. It's not negotiation. I'm just being really straight. That's what I will do it for. Now, one of the things that I learned from them, and I've seen it with a lot of other people as well, is they come in really, really low, and they do that to try and knock your confidence in a negotiation. So let's say, I'll just use numbers to make it. Let's say this is worth £10,000, and I think it's worth £10,000, and they probably think it's worth 8. Let's say, and I think it's worth 10, they'll come in at 1.5 and be brutal, because then you're like, oh my God, maybe it's not worth 10. So you then already are probably down at 7.
Yeah.
Because they're knocking your confidence, and suddenly you're settling at 5, where frankly they would have been prepared to pay 8 in the first place. But it's a tactic. And a lot of people use that tactic. So when you go into a negotiation of any kind, and this really helped me with the Bombay Bicycle Club negotiation, you have to know what great looks like. Don't ever go into a negotiation without knowing what great looks like for you. You say, this is what great looks like to me in your head. You know what are you trying to achieve here? What does great look like? And what does walk away look like? And then chances are you'll meet somewhere in the middle, but you stick to it, and you have to separate yourself from the negotiation.
I've got 3 this next week for with some of the big retailers. I can't obviously say who, but it's interesting because when you're a small brand up against a bigger retailer, you're always going to have the fight is always going to be David versus Goliath. And what I love your story, Sarah, is almost 2 instances with the Clapham House negotiation and the coffee, is you've had your David versus Goliath moment, but you've come out swinging. Do you know what I mean? Which is amazing.
Yeah, you just have to stand. I mean, they're still Goliath, right? It doesn't change anything. But how Goliath makes you feel, you can control.
Yeah. So it's having like what you actually want in the negotiation. I think also be prepared for them to anchor you like well in the back of your court, basically. Is there any other tactics you've learned? Like you've been around some, obviously done way more negotiations than pretty much everyone listening to this. Like what else have you learned that could be really super valuable, do you think?
So you have to assess your worth, and that can be a very difficult thing to do. You have to understand, what are you worth to them? You know, what you have to put yourself in the shoes of the person sat opposite you to understand where the negotiation could go. And I think if you don't understand the other side of the table, you have less chance of making something work. My husband and I actually have very, very different, not very different, but quite different negotiating, the way in which we negotiate. He's softer, and it takes him longer to say what it is that he's looking for. So he builds a relationship, whereas I manage expectations very quickly up front. Both can work, but you have to assess who you're with. And often we'll go into a negotiating situation and we'll have the first meeting and we will go, no, this one's for me. Or we'll go, no, this one's definitely for you. You need to lead on this.
Interesting, yeah.
And that depends on the person. So some of the businesses that we've bought with the Nightcap, for example, Michael, that's his job within Nightcap anyway, so he would always lead on them. But there have been some instances where it's been very obvious that actually the way I would manage a negotiation might work better in a situation. So I might take over or step in or come in for a couple of meetings and leave. And there's been others where it's so him that I'm not allowed near the deal, because actually he's built such a strong relationship with these people that he needs to take it over the line. And that again, but it still comes down to us understanding fundamentally what is driving the person on the other side of the table. So when it's, for example, quite a big ego and maybe they don't really want to sell, or it's difficult, definitely Michael. He'll always empathize and be amazing with that character. When it's more contractual, I'll probably get the job done a lot quicker and cleaner. And, everybody appreciates the fact that I'm really straight talking, always manage expectations. We all know where we are. Whereas so if it's somebody that's quite transactional, they might prefer that way of working to Michael's way of working, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. So usually between the two of us, Michael can do both. It's what he does and he's brilliant at it. But, and I can do both if I want to, but this is kind of a natural way of negotiating. So you've got to understand, what does great look like to you? But then also, as part of that, it's really important to understand what are you worth to them.
Goes back to what we said at the beginning when we were talking about Raymond Blanc, about going with your nature. And it's the same in negotiation of going with your natural style. And I think a lot of the books I've read, because at the minute I am very much a small fry, I'm having to negotiate with bigger people, but I'm having to separate myself from that. But I think a lot of these books almost tell you to be this bloody American cop. Do you know what I mean? Or this FBI investigator. And it's if that's not your natural, just go with your natural kind of, go with your nature. That's super valuable.